Hello and welcome to the Working Tools Masonic Podcast, where today will be part 2 of our interview with Most Worshipful Brother Julius Brown.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our opinions and thoughts are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions, either here on YouTube or on our Facebook page. We'd also appreciate a thumbs up and especially any comments on our videos.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we will be interviewing Most Worshipful Brother Julius Brown, who is the past Grand Master of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of Washington and Jurisdiction. I'm Very Worshipful Brother Matthew Appel, and my cohort, Very Worshipful Brother David Colbeth, is also, the two of us are past district deputies here in Grand Lodge of Washington. And our third host is Worshipful Brother Stephen Chung, who's a past master up in British Columbia and the Yukon. And again, we have with us Most Worshipful Brother Julius. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me again.
So I'm curious, having I think gotten the title right for once. I'm curious what the end jurisdiction is. So most mainstream lodges seem to be basically a state, as you were saying at the end of our previous show. What's the jurisdiction in Washington and jurisdiction?
So we have a lot of military lodges overseas, Germany, Korea, Philippines, Guam, Japan, and so those are our jurisdictional property lodges. They tend to, because the military bases are American soil. So, if you've got enough members of your jurisdiction in that area, they can petition a Grand Lodge to start a study class, and then move from study class to being designated as a lodge. It's the same way that, typically you would start a lodge. You start the study club, and then you petition a Grand Lodge for missing a word right now, but it's been so long. And then once you get that designation, you're tenured for a year. After you prove yourself, then you get that lodge designation.
So that 1 year period of dispensation is similar to what you might call mainstream lodge. I'm curious though about the study hall idea. I don't think I've ever heard of that. I guess we might call it a club here, although it's not. Clubs are more affiliation related, like motorcycles or firemen, or the affinity. What do they call it? Affinity clubs. But what's a study class or study hall?
Just when you get enough Master Masons, you get some Master Masons together that want to study Masonry. They're already Master Masons, and they just want to study and practice. They don't have a lodge, in that area, so you form a study club. And it's just a bunch of Masons who get together and do esoteric studies, do ritualistic studies. And generally those are the preformings of lodges, the study clubs. The one that we had in Swabish Hall was Jimmy Simmons. We started our Jimmy Simmons Lodge, study hall. And then once we petitioned the Grand Lodge, then we became a under dispensated lodge. And so once we served that year under dispensation and proved that we could, adhere to all the rules, administer all the bylaws, and do all the things that a lodge could do, then we were granted a designation as a lodge. So typically the study club is like the preformings of the lodge.
And I think you mentioned something about having to petition Grand Lodge to form the study club or study hall. Is that so? It is a formal process then.
Yes. You petition for the dispensation for the study club. The Grand Lodge grants you that hey, you guys can form a study club, and we'll acknowledge you as a study club. And you go from that study club, and you develop your paperwork, and then you request from the district deputy in that area a dispensation to the Grand Lodge to form a lodge. Once you're granted that dispensation, you serve under that dispensation for a year, maybe two. It's up to how fast it takes you to formulate your lodge paperwork and all of that, and then you serve under that dispensation, and then you request the full lodge status, and then the Grand Lodge will typically, if you've met all the requirements, they'll grant you that full lodge status. And so that's kind of how the soldiers who were stationed here became Master Masons under Washington jurisdiction. They go to Germany, and there's no lodge in their area. There's 6 or 7 of them. They may get together and do a study hall and just begin to study, and then if you find a lodge that will create some of your new people in the area, make them Masons, you can do that. They can go through, like our Masons were raised under Hermione Bradley in Nuremberg, and then we would go back to Swabish Hall, and we would study under our study hall. So then when we petitioned for a dispensation, when we sent for a dispensation, all of those members, once they became Master Masons, were allowed to demit to the dispensation, to demit into the lodge in order to formulate the lodge, since they were already Washington jurisdiction Masons.
So in a study hall, do you utilize ritual as well, or is it just getting together and maybe breaking bread or whatever? Or is it
you practice ritual work, you study the esoteric work, you study the 357, all of those things are done in the study halls.
Very cool. Yeah, David, I think, has a theory that we should maybe have some study halls that are turn some current lodges under the Grand Lodge of Washington into study halls.
You guys have the what do you call it? The classes, the Masonic. I can't think of the name of it. I'm sure you used to have Masonic classes that you would do,
like study sessions and lodge leadership retreats and that kind of stuff.
I can't think of the name of it. It's a lodge of something.
Lodge of Instruction.
Lodge of Instructions.
There have been those over the year. There are some districts that do some pretty good education systems, but they're not quite a more formal. I like the idea of a study hall process, as Matt alluded. One of my other questions was going to be if Prince Hall Grand Lodge has an inspection process or inspection season, where we don't in Washington Grand Lodge or whatever. We don't have that process, but I know there's some jurisdictions that each year, and even in Canada, I think it happens too, where the district deputy will go and observe the lodge perform their ritual, whether they have a candidate alive or not, or if they just perform it and without a candidate. But the idea is to prove that you can meet the criteria for dispensation or to own your charter. Can you make a Mason, basically? and
that's the district deputy. That's his job, basically. And under Prince Hall, it's the same. We, as a district deputy, in fact, I wrote the handbook for Prince Hall, for Washington. I did a deputies conference because we have a lot of young masters and Masons who potentially want to be a district deputy or want to be a Grand Lodge officer. And so, I just gathered all of the things that I gathered during my time through the process. And then all of the things that I created or plans that I put in process, and I just put it out. One of the things I do is write. So I like to put everything down on paper. And so I created the deputies conference and a deputies handbook, the deputies guide for our jurisdiction. And basically, at least once or twice a year, the deputy goes visit the lodges in his area. And he sits in on their business meeting, and he sits in on their ritualistic work, and he evaluates that. And I know as Grand Master, I wanted my deputies to make sure that the lodges were proficient in doing their work. We being that we're military, and sometimes things get expedited and shortcuts get made, and so we have to hold them to the standards. And so with that, the district deputy is very important in making sure that these standards are upheld and that these dotted lines are crossed, and and knowing that I had to sit at a word processor and type up the bylaws for my lodge in Germany. I expect everyone here to be able to knock that kind of stuff out and just handle all the business that they have to handle very easily. Things are a lot easier now to create and do, and reports are able to be written without a problem. So if you give them the guidelines of what you expect and what you're looking for, it's easy. Exactly. If you give them the guidelines of what to expect, it's terribly easy in order to give you those, to make sure that they are upholding those standards. And that's the deputy's job, the district deputy.
About how many lodges are there in the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Washington and jurisdiction?
Grand Lodge, right now we have 65 active. We have maybe about 12 who have gone inactive because of troop withdrawals overseas, Europe. We have some troop withdrawals in Korea, as you know, these last few years. And that may change now. So those are the type of things. And usually wherever the troops are, that's where we are. Guam is pretty much stable. It's the Navy is over there, and they're locked in. Japan as well. The Philippines the fellas there are getting a little long in the tooth. They don't have a lot of new service members, but they have been able to affiliate themselves with the Grand Lodge of the Philippines, and actually have some of our youth group is the Knights of Pythagoras, and some of the young men who have gone through our youth group over the years have actually joined our Prince Hall Grand Lodge have joined the lodge there. So
would you say about half the lodges are overseas and about half in Washington, or is it?
No, it's about a quarter of them are overseas. The main bulk of them are here.
What you mentioned inactive, is there a process for going inactive then coming back again?
Yes. The charters. So if you're at lodge, vis-a-vis the military, and you, like when my lodge, when my base closed, there was no need to have a lodge in that area anymore. And so what we did was we packed everything up and sent the charter back to the Grand Lodge and requested that the Grand Lodge hold on to that charter until it could be stood up again. And then what the Grand Lodge does is they never burn those charters. That if a lodge UD or something start up in another area, they can take that same, instead of issuing a new charter, they can issue that charter to another lodge. So where we started, Jimmy Simmons in Europe, once it went defunct and the base closed, we sent the charter back to the Grand Lodge, and now we have a Jimmy Simmons in Korea.
Is it revived? Is it the same lodge number and everything, or is it just the same?
Yes.
That's excellent.
Yes. They never burn the charter. It's held on to and just reissued.
Matt, I'm going to get a plural membership, I think.
I do know that the lodge here in the one over in Gig Harbor, in Bremerton area over there was two of the lodges who joined together, and now the lodge has both names. And I thought that was really cool. I had never seen that done before.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. Now, I wanted to backtrack because you said something that kind of caught my attention. You said your youth groups and they had a different name. So you guys aren't like affiliated with DMLA like we are?
We have an affiliation with the DMLA, but our group is called the Knights of Pythagoras, our youth group, and that falls under the junior warden's programs. He's in charge of all the youth groups, and I know the females have a different group. I can't think of the name of their youth group, but they have a different youth group as well. Knights of Pythagoras was a national program under the Prince Hall Grand Conference of Grand Masters, and so that's kind of the program that the conference has sponsored for years, and so it kind of took off. The Knights of Pythagoras and the ritualistic work and all of that was developed under the conference. and it moved around the nation. And then there was some about 10 years ago, there were some issues with the leadership of the Knights of Pythagoras and the Conference of Grand Masters, and so the conference cut its ties with them. And each state at that time pretty much decided to stand up their own Knights of Pythagoras sort of grand body. California had always been on its own. I believe Texas was on its own. And we were part of the national group, but when the conference cut ties, we started our conference. I mean, our Knights of Pythagoras under Washington jurisdiction. When I was Grand Master, all of that started to come back together, and so now it's all just like the Grand Lodges. They're all separate in their sovereignty, but they conference just like we do in the Conference of Grand Masters, and they network nationally.
When you're a district deputy, how big is your territory or your region that you cover?
So we have, Washington, we have, I wanted to say 5 different district areas, from Vancouver to Federal Way was all at one time District 11. And then I think a few years later, they split that up into 2 different districts. Everett area is District 9. We have a lodge in Canada, which is its own district. That's District 5. We have lodges over in Spokane and Pasco, and so that's another district. So we've got like 5 different districts, and so it depends on the size. District 11, Pierce County, and from Pierce on down to Vancouver is pretty much the largest. I think there's 12 lodges in that area, and so it gives the district deputy and his assistant a good bit of meetings to attend. And
assistant.
Yes,
we didn't get an assistant.
As a district deputy for this district, you have to have an assistant because there's no way you're going to make all of those meetings.
I only had 5 lodges. You don't need an assistant for that.
Yeah. See, like Everett, and they have those 2 lodges, and that's it. So they're good. You go right across the border. He's just having problems right now, but typically he runs back and forth across the border, and yeah.
Is that Evergreen number 9 still up in Everett?
Yes.
Yep. Many years ago, I visited them.
Yeah.
When I was a junior warden, I guess they.
You remember
and I got
who the worship master was?
I don't remember who the worshipful master was.
Was
I sat next to the junior warden of Evergreen at the time, and his name was James. I can't remember his last name.
James Harris, bald head.
Yes, and he worked in medical services, as I recall.
Yes, he's the current district deputy for.
Exactly. So it turned out years later, I was at the outdoor degree up in Granite Falls,
yes.
And I sat next to him, and I spent like an hour going, I know this guy. It turns out that we were junior wardens at the same time, and then we were both deputies and secretaries of our lodge at the same time.
That's a hard working man. When I became Grand Master, I tapped him for deputy up there, and he was like, "Grant, I don't know, I got enough jobs." I was like, "You're the man. You got to get the job done. So let's go."
As you said earlier, when you're successful at something, you get more work to do.
Exactly. Yes, he's a good brother.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
I'm also curious. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm just going to ask, I'm also curious about the process for nomination as Grand Lecturer. I know there's a lot of jurisdictions that they have their, it's a somewhat informal nomination process. Some are even more formal to maybe a junior Grand Deacon or senior Grand Deacon or some other station. And there's places like Washington that it seems like a little bit of a political process where whoever gets the most votes. And so I'm curious a little bit about that nomination process. So
in the Prince Hall Grand Lodge, some Grand Lodges, it's an appointed position. And the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Washington, it's an elected position. And I think it should be an appointed position, but that's just my personal opinion. It's an elected position, and it's become more and more political over the years. And I would love to take the education of Masonry away from the politics of Masonry, but it gets hard to do when that position is, an elected position. So the nomination process is just like everything else. It's how your impact on masonry and who you know. I think when my name was thrown in the hat, I had no I had no running. No, I ran against no one until I got to Grand Senior Warden, the Senior Grand Warden position. I think someone. No, I'm sorry. It was the Deputy Grandmaster was the first time that someone nominated someone besides myself. Up until that point, I never had to run. I never had to. It was always I was the only one nominated and elected. So
that's interesting too, because the Grand Lodge of Washington Code doesn't have the ability to technically to dominate anybody other than to submit your availability is the proper language. There's no process for submitting your availability for anything other than Junior Grand Warden, and so you can't run for.
That's what I meant earlier about your structure is more in line, and I'm trying to get our Grand Lodge to put away the petty bickering and things of that nature that we tend to go through sometimes at Grand Session, and they mix and match. And so because you don't like this guy who's in the Senior Grand Warden seat, you want to slide your guy in here, and it's not the grand body, is in charge at Grand Session, but when you establish a structure from the Grand Lodge level at the Grand Master, and you point that out, the only seat that should be available should be who's going to be the next Senior Grand Deacon, Grand Senior Deacon, because that person should automatically fall in and start getting that training and move swiftly through the line without any impedance, outside of death or something of that nature. That's the way it should be, but it doesn't happen that way. It's sometimes it gets a little. I'm not going to say sometimes. Most often, during my time, I was able to put a stop to it, and it was generally just because of the way that I governed. I didn't mince, words. I said who I wanted to be, where, and I preached that the whole time that. You got to stop trying to mix and match. If I'm working with somebody and I'm training somebody to take over for me when I move on, that person should be the person that you put in. You don't want to snatch somebody out of left field and bring them and sit them in that slot, and they have no idea, no continuity. And so that's one of the things that I say, that your structure is better than ours. Whereas though, once you're in that line, you're in that line unless you really screw up or you get ill or you die. Other than that, but in our case, it doesn't happen that way. Sometimes if somebody don't like, you get knocked out of the line.
Yep, I always say when people talk about things like along those lines where their Masons are not working in unity, I always say that it's like churches. We're all there to worship God and do good things, and we're all human, and it sometimes it goes astray.
I have a friend that called us Masons. All we are a church without a choir. That's what they say. You guys are just a church without a choir. You have the same issues.
Well, that depends. Up here, we have lodges that sing.
You got a choir, yeah.
I know my lodge has singing cards, but nobody is capable of taking it from that and expressing it properly, so we don't.
So were you I know in some jurisdictions that the Grand Master is Grand Master for more than 1 year. Were you Grand Master for 1 year or 2 years or 5 years, or how does that go?
2 years. 2 years.
2 years. All right.
Some time ago, we ratified our code that the Grand Master could only sit for 2 years, and then he has to be out of the seat. Ever since then, every Grand Master has tried to run a third year, except for the one that got put out after the first year. I was the first one since 2004 who, after my second year, handed over the reins the way it was supposed to be done. And I told my line, I said, this is how it's going to happen. I said, the Deputy Grand Master is going to stand up and nominate me. I'm going to decline, and I'm going to nominate him. And I wanted to go the same way all the way around. And it did. And the first year, everything was really smooth. Some guys, some past grandmasters had got into the Deputy Grandmaster's ear and was trying to get him to run against me. And I told him, I said, hey, Deputy, I like you. We've been working together a good time, and I want to see you be successful. So don't run against me because you'll lose. And I meant that. You will lose, and we will lose you to the Grand Lodge. And I didn't want that. I wanted the cohesion. I could have let him get knocked out. It wouldn't have mattered, but I wanted to establish a new mindset of, being able to put away those petty picks and toils and be able to just work on the programs that the Grand Lodge have, and it's not about me, and, because I'm not going to get any great recognition in life. I wrote a piece before. I said, when I get to the pearly gates, they're not going to call me most worshipful. They don't care. It's all about the deeds that I've done in life. So these titles, they have no real meaning, except to us. So what we need to do is be able to work together, whether we're Republican, Democrat, black, white, gay, straight. We just got to know how to work together in conversation, understanding, and listening is the main thing. And so I was able to contain that during my time. And right after I left, I guess my deputy wasn't quite as strong as I was to hold that together, because it's on his first year, they just went haywire. And so now he's on his third year because of COVID, because we canceled Grand Session last year. And I put together a electronic voting process that we would, be able to do our Grand Session online. And he kind of wavered back and forth. And so they said we were, and then we said we weren't, then we said we weren't. So it's gone back and forth. And so I'm just thinking that we're not going to do it this year, and just wait until next year. So, but typically it's 2 years. So every Grandmaster, like I say, served 2 years, and then he has to get out of the seat and move on. But every Grandmaster I said, except myself, challenged that mission. And I believe wholeheartedly that the deputy, the current Grandmaster, who was my deputy, would have, at the second year, had we had Grand Session this year, he would have done the same as I did, and made a smooth transition of power.
When do you normally hold your Grand Sessions, and is it in the same place every year, or is it move around?
We move around. It's in July, the first Saturday in July, typically second Saturday in July, which usually falls. And we had a commitment with Pasco, so we were in Pasco for 6 years or so, and I believe we still owe them 3 years for the Red Lion Inn in Pasco. The reason we chose them, because they really, the hotel worked with us a lot, but somewhere in the process there, the hotel changed ownership. And so a lot of the concessions that we had in the beginning, we don't have with the new owners. And so it became a problem. And one of the things that I recognized is that by us meeting over there every year, a lot of our overseas lodges were not coming, because there's really nothing to do in Pasco. You got people flying in from Japan, and you move them into this little town in the middle of, and there's really not a lot there for them to do. They just stop coming.
That's too polite. Expensive. Not a lot to do is polite.
But yeah, that's so, it got expensive. And so we were able to explain to the hotel, listen, you're losing money because we can't bring the membership. And so we need to, get out of Pasco for a couple of years and, build up and then come back. And so that's what we were working on with these contracts. So we came over here. I negotiated to get us over here for 3 years, and then we'll go back over there and do another 3 years. But by the time we go back, things may have changed. So this year would have been our second year over here, and we would add another year over here. And so we're still in the negotiation process.
I have two kind of questions that maybe we're closer to the end here. One of them is, you mentioned that you write a lot, and you said you wrote a piece about some ideas. And so do you have a blog, or do you post those things anywhere? Or and then the second is do you have as Grandmaster, did you have a project or a program that you wanted to talk about?
My writings have been over the years as just I've fancied myself a writer all my life, and so I've written articles and things of that nature. And so when I got in the seat, I started writing, just journals and things of that nature, and I would share them with Master Masons, and I would share them on the internet at that time. And over the long story short, I was visiting. I was doing my Grandmaster visit to what we call Feds, which is our Far East District session. And so, what our Far East District says, instead of me going to Japan, Korea, the Philippines, and Guam every year, they all get together in one location, and it moves around each year. So this year, 2016, I was in Korea. It was held in Korea. No, I'm sorry, 2017, it was held in Korea. And the Junior Grand Warden of Oklahoma, he was recently, after Derry Vaughn got out of the seat, he was a government employee, and he was in Korea at the time. And when he heard I was there, he had to come to our district meeting. And he told me something that it just blew my mind. I wrote a piece called Et tu Bruta, and it was basically in 2004, and it was about being stabbed in the back, and how when Julius Caesar got stabbed by all those people, the only one that really hurt him was when Brutus did it, and so it's that, and the what was the other one? The other piece was A House Divided. And it was about, a house divided, masonry, and so forth and so on. And then this young man stood up. He's the newly elected Junior Grand Warden of Oklahoma jurisdiction, Prince Hall. And he showed me on his phone where he still had those articles and he shared it. He said when he was district deputy, he shared it with all his worshipful masters and so forth and so on. So the long story short, I've always wrote and shared it on the internet and things of that nature. And now I work with the Grand Senior for our jurisdiction, and so I do our Washington Monitor, and so a lot of the stuff that I've written or do write, it goes into the Washington Monitor, and I'm posting those now on our website instead of we used to print them, and now I'm doing flip pages on the website. So it's at the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge Washington.org. So it's MWPHGL.wa. I'm sorry, MWPHGLwa.org. As a past Grandmaster, one of the things that the main focus that I wanted to the program that I put in place was the prostate cancer program. When I went into office, my brother-in-law was fighting prostate cancer, and several members of the lodge were fighting prostate cancer, and a lot of men were fighting prostate cancer, and nobody was talking about prostate cancer. And so I said, we got to start talking about prostate cancer. And so I just guess at the time everybody was starting to recognize that it was killing us. And so the programs started popping up, and I said, well, that's where I want to focus my attention is on prostate cancer. And so as you see, this is No Shave November. I have been letting it grow. I don't usually be this hairy, but for the No Shave November, it's you're supposed to take all of the dollars that you would spend grooming, and I'm usually have a haircut. I get my haircut every week, but because it's November, I'm taking all those dollars and I'm donating them to a prostate cancer program. And so we have our Prince Hall Against Prostate Cancer program, and we have our foundation, which is the Prince Hall Foundation of Washington. It's the phfwa.org, and people can go there and make donations to the prostate cancer fund. And that was the program that I pushed while I was Grandmaster, and it's been the same program that I'll still work on. And every Grandmaster tends to continue their programs when they get out of the seat, and for the Grand Lodge, and that's my main goal and focus. And push, and running the foundation.
So I wholeheartedly, I was going to launch into a story, but we don't have time. Support your efforts on the prostate cancer front. It certainly is a issue that touches many of us in masonry for obvious reasons.
Yes.
I have a quick question before we wrap up, since time is running short. I know there are some lodges or some grand lodges where you cannot be members of more than one lodge. Can one be a member of more than one lodge in Washington, Prince Hall, or?
No, not a full-fledged member. You can be an associate, but not a member.
So could a mainstream Mason like myself?
Oh yeah, we have plenty of Washington mainstream associates and so forth, and back and forth. You just can't be a full-fledged member.
Interesting. All right. Well, on that note, I know David will put in the show notes the links to the Prince Hall Foundation and to the Prince Hall website. And on behalf of Steve, David, and myself, Most Worshipful Brother Julius, thank you very much for coming on the show. We really appreciate our conversation with you.
Can I put in one more plug, and that's for your Grand Lodge? And today we had a second, or not a second, but we've had one of a series of conversations of race and masonry, and it's been a wonderful session. The session today was just as fulfilling as all of the other sessions had been in your Grand Lodge. And Don, past most worshipful Don from British Columbia, he was there, and it's an open conversation about race and masonry and how we can make a difference in by using the working tools and the things that we learned in masonry and applying it to regular life, and how we can make a better situation than where we are now. And so I wanted to commend your Grand Lodge again for spearheading those things, and Washington itself, just for being the type of Masons that Washington raised. And Washington, since I've been in Washington, I've had nothing but great relationships, great open conversations with the mainstream Masons, and I take that to heart. So I want to thank you again for that. My visits to British Columbia and to that past master's degree that they do up there, man, it's beautiful. If you've never been, you got to go. But I want to thank you guys and for what you're doing for masonry.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Yes, and thank you for all you do for masonry.
Yes, thank you.
And with that, thank you for turning into the Worshipful Tools Masonic Podcast. Goodbye.